So I want to start off with a question of reflection. And we have some spouses in the room, so this is going to kind of be good for us to think about. But I want you guys to think, and if you have, raise your hand. Has anybody ever told you that you have an issue with communication? I'll tell you, my wife is sitting right here, and she would say that she wishes I had 100 hands because I'm told all the time, right? And it's not the communication that you think about a lot with the fire service. It's the communication, the interpersonal communication, the one-on-one talking, how we talk to each other, right? And the call that you see behind, I want to reflect a little bit on the call that got me to this moment here to where I'm here sharing with you guys today. This call here that's on the back of the screen, just to give you a little bit of a background, it was late in the afternoon, right in the middle of winter. We're sitting out front of the bay. We just got back from a call, so we're rinsing off the rig, getting all the dirt, cleaning it up for the next run. And an accident goes out in the first due. And the accident goes out initially was just an engine and a transport unit that was assigned to the call. So like we do, because we like to be a little squirrely in the firehouse, we go check up on the notes, and because it was right down the street from the firehouse, we went and physically looked out on the road and saw the traffic was pretty backed up. The first engine got on scene, and they said that they had one person trapped in the vehicle. Okay, cool. So we got an extrication. We know we're going to be on that. The ladder truck I ride on, we have extrication capability. So we get geared up and we start heading towards the call. So as we get down the road, we had to make a U-turn. We come around. Traffic, like I said, is pretty backed up. It had just started snowing. It's right on the cusp of nighttime or daytime and nighttime, that switchover, right? So we get on scene, and we saw as we were pulling up, we saw the tracks. The patient drove their vehicle off the road and nailed a tree and spun uphill. So you can kind of see the orientation of the vehicle right here. It kind of spun. The front end is against, to the left here is where the tree is, and the car here kind of spun up. So it was a unique situation. The front end of the car is actually on the side of the vehicle. One of the worst pin jobs I had been on without another vehicle involved. He went full speed into that tree. We got on scene and we had to do what we needed to do. So as we started getting this thing stabilized, we tied the car back to prevent it from sliding down the hill. Everybody got out. They knew their roles because we had training and we developed what we needed to develop with our guys on the unit. We start peeling away these doors, and we realize the A-post is completely pushed in on the patient. We pushed that away, and we realized, at this point now, the A-post is completely separated from the floor pan. So we had a lot of things going on with this person, and it took us a little bit of time to get that patient out. What I really liked about this call, and just to give you an idea, we had volunteer rescue on the call. We had multiple EMS units. We had PD, and our EMS falls under the same umbrella as the fire department. We had multiple units on the call, and we're all operating for that same goal, right? That same goal being to get this person out of the vehicle and get them to the hospital as quickly as possible under that golden hour, right? So as we start doing this, and we're all doing our own thing, but when we took the call, we hot washed it as a unit, and then we went back to the firehouse a few shifts later, and we got everybody who was on the call to sit at the firehouse, and we talked as a collective group. So all the ambulances, our truck, the rescue unit, everybody who was there, the chief who was involved, we're all sitting back and we're having this hot wash, and the common theme we talked about was communication. Communication in the sense of we're all there for the same thing, but it almost felt like maybe we were operating with different perspectives, right? So our job on the truck was to get in there and get that patient out. Our job was extrication. The engine's job was hazards and to have a hose line ready in case this car lit off. EMS, their job was patient care. And even though we were all formulating for that same goal, right, we weren't necessarily communicating very well. So I was sitting back and I'm listening to as we're talking, and everybody's kind of giving their experience and their perspectives and their how their situation was influenced by this call. And I started thinking, I'm like, man, how do we get better as communicators, right? How do we communicate so we're on the same page? And even from that aspect, and it's such a large scale because it's between units, from that aspect, how do we do it to the people that we're working with, right? Like how do we communicate better to those that we're working with day in and day out? So that's where these vital reflections came from. And these reflections are more in the sense of how do we get better at effective communication, right? Are we even effectively communicating? Are we getting our message across that we intended, right? And it's such a hard thing to kind of develop because our perspectives are all shaped differently than somebody else, right? And my wife, like I said, tells me all the time, you need to communicate a little bit better because I have no idea what you were thinking or what you're saying, right? So my presentation today, and hopefully you guys walk away thinking about how it could be a little bit better, right? I want you to reflect on how well you're communicating effectively and whether we even are effectively communicating to the people that we're riding with on our units, all right? I want to kind of dive off for a minute and talk about what kind of sparked this thought process along with the call that I ran. I keep bringing up my wife because she's an amazing woman, my best friend, and she handed me this book. She's just to give you her background, she's a third grade teacher. Her job is she has about 180 days to take 20 plus different kids and get them from point A to point B to where they're ready to go to the next grade level, right? So she has to differentiate her instruction, right? So each person in that classroom, even though they're going towards the same goal, right, she's teaching them differently because they have different thought processes, different learning and things like that. So she hands me this book. It's called Growth Mindsets by Dr. Carol Dweck. And if you guys haven't read this book, it was a game changer for me. Looking at this book, the theme in this was there's two types of people in the world. You have your fixed mindset people, right? And you have your growth mindset. And those fixed mindset people, I think we can probably all think about who those fixed mindset people are, right? The fixed mindset are those who don't want to train. They don't want to be involved in critically thinking. They don't want to put themselves out there to make mistakes or learn something new. They're closed off. They don't want anybody to tell them that they're wrong because they think that they're right all the time, and they're not willing to progress. The culture that we need to instill in our firefighters is that of growth mindset firefighters, right? I want a firefighter who's willing to go out on the limb. I would rather pull somebody back than have them be scared or timid to do something, right? I want to instill them, hey, you know what? It is absolutely okay to make a mistake, to experience different things, to grow. I want these firefighters, right? We're talking about that culture change. I want to get these firefighters to grow. We need to instill this idea of this growth mindset, this idea that let's reflect on what we do. Let's truly think about the why and what we're doing, and let's take that to the next level. Let's develop this and take it even further, right? So this reflection, and this is against, or it's so broad for life itself, right? Like you could take this whole communication idea, and it transcends even further than the fire service, right? When we're looking at this, the idea that we need to instill in people is we need to self-reflect and understand that this is a process, right? We're not all going to be like, Chief Davis by the end, who has, a ton of experience, right? But we're working to get there. We may not be there yet, right? But we're working to get there to be that senior person in the firehouse, or that chief that everybody can rely on, that sets the tempo, that sets the tone for exceptional service delivery, right? So that growth mindset idea is huge, right? So taking that reflection and learning from what we're truly doing, we have to define what effective communication is. And as I started thinking about communication, I started thinking, well, what can we do, or what do I need to do to get better? So like we do, I hit up Amazon and I start looking for communication books. And these communication books, there's a ton of them that you can find. But I found one that really hit in particular to what I was looking for. And I've read quite a few, but this one was very, very good. The Power of Communication by Hale Fred Garcia. He takes warfighting doctrine from the Marines, right? The book that's so popular in our fire service right now. And he takes that and he parallels it to the power of communication. And in this power of communication, and I want you guys to read this along with me, he defines communication as an act of will directed towards a living entity that reacts. Think about how powerful that is. That's one of the best definitions of communication I've ever heard. An act of will towards a living entity that reacts, right? That act of will is goal-oriented. I'm investing in this person. I need them to go do something, right? I'm trying to be a force multiplier here to get them to act on the things that we need done when we arrive on scene, right? The living entity part is so huge, right? Because we aren't just closed off vessels. We're all people with different experiences and different exposures and different ideas and different backgrounds and different home lives, right? People are so dynamic, right? And I feel like the fire service has a tendency to close off these, we have to put everybody in the same box. But no, people are people that bring their own experiences and perspectives to the table, right? But the last part of that, the reaction, the definition of true effective communication is in the reaction, right? Did they react the way that I wanted them to react, right? If they didn't react, then was my communication effective? Absolutely not. But if they reacted the way that we intended them to react, awesome. That's effective communication. And the job is truly on reflecting about whether that reaction was what we intended, right? So now we kind of have to dive down this idea of, well, how do we effectively communicate, right? And this reflection process is an ongoing thing, right? The communication process is ongoing, right? I could have a really good conversation with one person, and then the next person I go to, they'll be like, I don't understand I have no idea what this guy just said. No idea, absolutely none, right? But how do we effectively communicate? These are the guys that I work with right now. I love these guys to death. These are my guys. I can't tell you how much love and passion I have for these guys that I work with. You have to know the people you're riding with. You have to put investments in the people that we get to ride with and work with every day, right? And I know there's details, and I know there's times where, volunteer units where, you don't necessarily know who's showing up on the box or showing up to run on these calls. We have to take the time to know the person as an individual. Any book you read on communication, it will tell you that you need to understand the audience, right? You guys we're all here today for FIRExTalk, right? We're here to talk about how we can be better for them in the fire setting, right? This service delivery. There's nothing different from when we communicate to the people that we ride with. We have to know how to get to them and understand their perspectives, their experiences, right? What I say to somebody with 6 months on the job, I can't expect them to understand the same thing I say to somebody with 15 years on the job that I've been working with for the last 5 years, right? I may have to be a little bit more detailed with that newer person. And that's on me as the person giving that message, right? Knowing people is key. Knowing the people that we work with is paramount. But with knowing them, we have to develop codes. So the more that we work with these people, right, the more that we get to be part of their lives, we develop codes and training, and those codes are huge. For us, just for an example, right, if we're the first to arriving ladder truck on scene of a house fire, right, we have something, and you guys probably have something, but we have, as a department, we have coded this as splitting crews, right? So if I say, hey guys, we're riding up here, we're splitting crews, that tells them in the back, right, the guys that are riding in the back with me, or the officer who gives us that message riding in the seat that day, we're splitting crews to get multiple things done on the fire ground. We've developed that code, and we know what that code is, right? If I have a detail in the unit and I say, hey, we're splitting crews, they're going to look at me wide-eyed and say, okay, well, can you just give me like a heads up? What does that mean, right? So we really have to distinguish these codes and develop these codes with our people, and that happens through training. The other thing with training and developing these codes is we have to take that knowledge, that tacit knowledge, that knowledge that's really, really hard to explain, right? We just know from experience, right? And there's all of us in this room have the opportunity to have a senior person on the rig and say, hey, why didn't you think of this? And you're like, oh, I don't know. I didn't even think about that. I haven't had that experience, right? The training ground is where we develop the exposure and the experience if we're not getting it on the street. And we have to develop it way before we hit the street with these calls, right? We have to develop it on the training ground. And we develop these codes so we can shortchange and not give too much information to the people that we're riding with, right? But now we have to determine, well, how are we going to give that information, right? How do I give that information so it sets up my crew for success? Well, I already know them, so I know their experiences, and I've developed a rapport, and we've developed codes, and we started talking about how we're going to make this effective communication work. Well, now I have to physically give them the information. And the thing that we have to think about is, again, remember, these are that living entity, right? That person that's experiencing the same call that you're experiencing. And going down the road, everybody's listening for specific keywords that's from their frame of reference, right? They've already developed a frame of reference that Rolodex said, oh, okay, so I hear this area that we're going to, or something that keyword that sticks out. Everybody's doing it on the rig, right? But we also have to understand that as we're going to these calls, we're not only trying to figure out what's going on, but we're putting on all this gear. We're stressed out. Our heart rate is increasing, right? We're hyped to get to that job and get to see some work, right? We're excited to go do what we have been training to do, right? If I start giving information, I have to understand that the people in the back and the people in the unit, they're already experiencing some kind of stress level, and stress tells us that you start to have auditory exclusion, right? Now you're starting to pinpoint certain words, right? So if we start rolling down the road and I'm saying, oh, if we're first due injury, we're going to do this, second due, we're going to do this, third due, we're going to do this. I'm just confusing those guys in the back, right? That the way you give it, the tonality, the expressions that you have, the amped upness, they feed off of that, right? So when we're giving that information, we have to understand that, the people on the unit are going through what's called reductive listening, right? They're starting to think or trying to find things because it's so dynamic, there's so much variables going on right now that people are starting to try to isolate those external variables coming in, and they're trying to isolate to the keywords that are on their Rolodex from their experiences. So when we give the information, it has to be clear, it has to be concise. We want to decrease the confusion and increase the success, right? I want to give them information that sets them up to get them to do what I need them to do. That is the key when we're giving the information. And we're not shoving a ton down their throat. We're truly giving them clear, concise messages. Decrease the confusion, and we're going to increase the success. The last part of that definition of communication was in the reaction. And that reaction is huge. So we're already going to a dynamic environment, right? So we have someone that calls 911. We get dispatched to a structure fire. The notes that show up on the computer are continuously updating. Bang, bang, bang. They keep throwing, shoving stuff on the radio. We're continuously updated. And then we get on scene. How many times have you guys rolled up on a box and it's different than what the note said on the computer, right? Or maybe it's at a different address. So the environment that we're going to is so dynamic, right? So with this dynamic environment, we have to be adaptive. And that reaction in the communication process, right, that act of will towards a living entity that reacts. The definition of effective communication is in the reaction. If people don't react to what I needed them to do in the way that I needed them to do it, then that's on me as the sender, right? So you have to send this message, you have a sender that's sending a message through a medium to the receiver. If the receiver is not reacting the way that you intended them to react, you have to adapt to your message, and you have to fine-tune that message. How many times have we gotten into conversations and you start getting angry at the person for not understanding you, right? It's easy. It's easy. How can you not understand me? I'm being so specific, right? Maybe you're not to them because of their perspectives, right? Because of their experiences, because of their exposure. So we have to take that adaptation, right? Adapt to the environment, and we have to adapt to how people are reacting to get the reaction we need to, right? It's a continuous job of reflecting. We have to continuously reflect to get the reaction we need. So again, as I'm reading these books and I'm looking at different things, and the art of or the mental coaching the mental game by H.A. Dorfman, a phenomenal book, and I can't tell you from the leadership aspect, huge help for some stuff that I was looking for. But this is how he defines communication. I want you guys to read it with me, and we're going to break it down together, right? So the best communicators know what they're saying, they know why they're saying it, they know when and how to say it, and they know who to say it to, right? The best communicators start with a respect for the power of language and for the communication process itself. And they have an initial respect for the people with whom they communicate. That's a lot to take in, but look at how he's breaking that down, right? They have a respect for the people they're communicating to. They're investing. They're knowing who they're communicating to, right? That living entity that's reacting or doing something, I'm investing in these people, right? That will, that goal-oriented will, they know how and when and why to say it. They know what to say it or who to say it to, right? And they know exactly what to say to get them to react the way that we need them to react. They have an understanding of the language itself, right? Because the language, knowing and how we give that information, the code and why we're giving it, you have to have a respect for it, right? Because if I come over here on the West Coast and I start talking about, well, these are our common terminologies, and people look at me and go, what are you talking about? Well, on the East Coast, we do it this way. How do you not understand, right? So you really have to have an initial respect for that language and for the people we're working with, right? The effective communication is in the reaction, right? That goal-oriented will through the living entity to react. And finally for today, my challenge for you guys, and take this outside of the fire service. It transcends so much further, right? I want you to think about how well you're effectively communicating. The next call you guys run, whether it's a EMS call, fire call, extrication, whatever the case may be, look to somebody you respect. Pull them aside and ask them how well you're effectively communicating. Did you understand everything? Was I clear enough for you? What could I have done better, right? You will absolutely be surprised to hear what people have to say. Continuously reflect, take that growth mindset, get the reaction you want, effectively communicate, right? Decrease the confusion, increase the success. Thank you, guys.